There isn't a bank account exemption per se. That is, that you're not going to be exempting a bank account. It's more what's in the account. Now, we are in the state of California, and bankruptcy code permits the states, if they want to use their own state tables. In California, we have two state tables, and we really don't use the exemption table that's in the bankruptcy code. So since I practice in California, what I'm going to do is focus on what's happening here in California. So we have these two state tables. One exemption table is for homeowners with equity in their principal residence. The other is for everybody else, what I call colloquially as the renter's table. Each table has a list of various categories of possessions. Some categories have dollar limits, others have no dollar limits. And our goal as we list your assets is to stick them into these various exemption categories so that they're protected from the depredations of the Chapter 7 trustee if we're doing a Chapter 7. If it's a Chapter 13, this is a much less important process. And if it's a Chapter 11, well, there are lots of things attendant on that. They're really beyond the scope of this particular question. In any event, let's say we use the homeowner's exemption table. Well, the homeowner's exemption table has a very generous exemption for the equity in the principal residence. As a result, there's really not a whole lot as far as exempting power to exempt just raw money in a bank account or cash on hand. And so generally, I urge people to spend the money before we file the petition so that they don't have a bunch of money lying around in a bank account, because if they do, they're going to have to disgorge it and give it to the Chapter 7 trustee. If, on the other hand, we're in the renter's table, in lieu of that homeowner's exemption for the equity in the property, there's something called the wildcard exemption. Believe it or not, that's really what it's called. And it's a very generous exemption that can be used to supplement the other exemption categories, or just to exempt something that doesn't seem to fit into any exemption at all. So when we're talking about money in a bank account, for the most part, we're probably going to need to use that wildcard exemption, unless the money came from Social Security. Social Security is treated separately, and I always urge people who are collecting Social Security to have a completely separate bank account just for Social Security. And so if there's money coming in from any other source, it goes into another account, and all of the Social Security goes into just the Social Security account. That way, if the trustee says, well, show me that this money really is exempt, we can show the bank statement showing that every deposit has come from Social Security, and that money is by definition exempt, whether we're using the homeowner's table or the renter's table. If we're using the renter's table and we have money that's coming in that's not from Social Security, then typically we're going to need to use that wildcard exemption. There are a couple of possible additional exemptions, but for the most part, it's going to be coming from that wildcard exemption. And similarly, there is a somewhat stingy mini wildcard kind of a thing in the homeowner's table that does give the possibility of exempting small amounts of money that you got within the 30 days prior to filing the petition. But for the most part, we're talking about using the wildcard if it's the renter's table, and we're talking about spending the money prior to filing if we're in the homeowner's table. So no, there really isn't an exemption for a bank account per se. Instead, what we have to do is exempt, to the extent possible, the way that we would exempt cash on hand. And that's typically going to be in the renter's table, the wildcard exemption, and if it's in the homeowner's table, spend the money before you file.